Hello, my friends. Welcome back. We're going to keep reading The Thief Lord together. So the last time I read, Prosper and Scipio went to I was pronouncing it Iola Segreta, but apparently it's Isola Segreta. Sorry, I don't speak Italian. I'm really trying my best. So they went to the Isola Segreta and they met two kids who they found out were the Conte and his sister, who had gone on the merry-go-round and de-aged themselves. They got younger. So the Conte... Scipio demanded from the Conte he wants to see the merry-go-round and ride it. So we're gonna keep reading and find out what happens next, see if they actually do ride the merry-go-round. Chapter 44. It's called The Merry-Go-Round. Prosper could feel Scipio shiver with anticipation and impatience as they followed Renzo through the large door into the garden. He wasn't sure himself whether he should feel excited. Ever since they had stepped onto this island, everything had felt so unreal, like in a dream. He couldn't even have said for sure whether it was a good dream or a bad one. Morosina didn't come with them. She stood between the pillars with the dogs by her side. Renzo led Scipio and Prosper to an arbor behind the house. Frozen leaves hung from the wooden trellis. The arbor led into a labyrinth. The hedges were overgrown, and the labyrinth had turned into a dense thicket. But Renzo didn't hesitate for a moment as he led Scipio and Prosper through it. Suddenly, he stopped and listened. "What is it?" Scipio asked. The sound of a bell drifted through the cold air. It sounded as if someone was ringing it rather impatiently. "That's the bell by the main gate," said Renzo. "Who could that be? The only person I'm expecting is Barbarossa, and he wasn't due to come until tomorrow." He looked worried. "Barbarossa?" Prosper looked at him, surprised. Renzo nodded. "I told you it was his idea to pay you with fake cash. He even procured it for me. But of course the Redbeard expects to be paid for his services. He wants to come tomorrow and pick up his reward. The old toys. He's had his eye on them for quite a while now." "That crook," Prosper muttered angrily. "So he knew all along that we would be given fake money for the job?" "Don't worry about it. Barbarossa cheats everybody." Renzo listened again, but the bell had stopped. The dogs were still barking, however. "Probably some tourist boat," he explained. "Morosina keeps spreading terrible stories about this island whenever she's in town, but we still get the occasional boat coming here. The dogs soon chase away even the most curious visitors." Prosper and Scipio looked at each other. They could both understand that. "I've been doing business with the Redbeard for quite a while now," Renzo told them as he struggled on through the overgrown hedges. "He's the only antique dealer who doesn't ask too many questions, and he's the only one Morosina and I have ever allowed to come to this island. He thinks, of course, that he's dealing with the Conte Barbarossa, who is so impoverished that he had to sell off some of his family's treasures every now and again. Morosina and I have lived for a long time off what the Barbarossa left behind. However, there will be no one to answer the door to Barbarossa when he comes to the gate tomorrow to pick up the toys. The Conte will have disappeared for good." "Barbarossa always pretended he didn't know what we were supposed to steal for the Conte," Prosper said. "He didn't know," Renzo answered. "Does he know about the merry-go-round?" Scipio asked. Renzo laughed. "Good heavens, no. The Redbeard is the last person I'd show it to. He'd immediately start selling tickets at 1,000,000 lire apiece. No, he's never seen it, and luckily, he pushed apart some thorny branches. It's quite well hidden." He squeezed between two bushes and seemed to disappear. Thorns scratched at Prosper and Scipio as they followed him. They emerged into a clearing surrounded by trees and hedges with their branches so densely intertwined they hid their treasure completely from the outside world. The merry-go-round looked exactly as Ida Spavento had described it. Prosper may have imagined it a bit more colorful and magnificent. The paint had long faded, worn off by the wind, the rain, and the salty air, but all this could not diminish the magic and gracefulness of its figures. All 5 of them were there: the unicorn, the mermaid, the merman, the seahorse, and the lion, who now spread both his wings as if he'd never lost one. They each hung on their pole beneath the wooden canopy and seemed to float. The merman held his trident in his wooden fist. The mermaid looked into the distance out of pale green eyes, dreaming of the waters of the open sea. The seahorse with its fishtail was so beautiful, it made you forget that there were horses with 4 legs at all. "Was it always here?" Scipio asked. He approached the merry-go-round cautiously. "As long as I can remember," Renzo answered. "Morosina and I were still very little when our mother brought us to this island, because the Barbarossa were looking for a kitchen maid. Nobody told us about the merry-go-round. It was kept very secret, but we found out eventually. It was already standing here by then. I sometimes crept out here to watch the rich children as they rode on it. Morosina and I would lie in the bushes and dream of riding it just once, but they always found us and chased us back to work. Years went by, and our childhood disappeared. Our mother died, and we grew older and older. The Barbarossa finally lost all their money and left the island. Morosina and I found work in the city. Then, one day in a bar, I heard the story of the beautiful merry-go-round of the Merciful Sisters. I knew immediately it had to be this merry-go-round on our island. I suddenly understood why the Barbarossa had kept it so secret. It had been stolen. I couldn't get the story out of my mind. I dreamed of finding the missing wing, of reviving the merry-go-round's magic, and of riding it with my sister. Morosina laughed at me, but when I decided to return to the island, she came with me. It was still here, and I decided to search for the missing wing. Don't ask me how long it took me to find out where it was. Renzo climbed on the merry-go-round and leaned against the unicorn. It was worth it, he said, stroking its wooden back. You brought me the wing, and Morosina and I took a ride. Does it matter which figure you sit on? Scipio jumped onto the platform and leaped onto the lion's back. Yes, it does. For a moment, Renzo stood hunched, just like the old man he had once been. The lion was the right mount for me. You and your friend will have to sit on one of the water creatures. Each animal works in a different way. Come on, Prop, Scipio called, waving at Prosper. Take your pick. Which one do you want, the seahorse or the merman? Prosper stepped curiously toward the merry-go-round. He could hear the dogs howling in the distance. Renzo had obviously also heard them. Frowning, he walked to the edge of the platform. Then he said to Scipio, Get off. I think I'll have to go back to the house to check on Morosina. But Scipio had already slipped off the lion's back and was now climbing onto the seahorse. What are you waiting for, Prop? He called out impatiently. But Prosper didn't move. Even though he could picture himself, tall and grown up, striding into the sandworth and simply pushing Esther and his uncle out of the way, then marching out with Bo by his side, he still couldn't step on the merry-go-round. He looked up at the unicorn, at the merman with the pale green face, at the lion, the winged lion. You first, Scipio, he finally said. Disappointment clouded Scipio's face. If you say so, he said. Then he turned to Renzo. You heard him. Let's go. Hold on, you really can't wait, can you? Renzo pulled a bundle from under his old-fashioned coat and threw it over to Scipio. You better put these on if you don't want to burst out of your clothes. They're some old things of mine, or should I say, of the Conte's. Scipio reluctantly climbed down from the seahorse again. Prosper nearly laughed out loud when he saw Scipio in Renzo's grown-up clothes. Don't laugh, Scipio grinned, throwing his own things at him. Then he rolled up the long sleeves, pulled up the baggy pants, and laboriously climbed back up on the wooden seahorse. These shoes are going to fly off my feet, he complained. As long as you don't fly off yourself. Renzo stepped up to Scipio and placed his hand on the seahorse's back. Hold on tight. Just one push and it's going to turn, faster and faster, until you decide at what age you jump off. Are you sure you won't change your mind? Scipio buttoned up the huge jacket. I've got to decide, he asked. I'm not saying I'd want to, but if I did want to, could I change back again, ride in the other direction? Renzo shrugged. As you can see, I haven't tried that yet. Scipio nodded. He looked at Prosper, who had taken a few steps back. He was nearly swallowed up by the shadow of the trees. Please come too, Prop. Scipio looked at Prosper so desperately he didn't know where to look, but still, Prosper shook his head. Well, suit yourself. Scipio sat up straight. The sleeves of the jacket slipped over his hands. Off we go, he called, and I swear I'll only jump off once I'm ready to have a shave. Renzo gave the seahorse a gentle shove. The merry-go-round started to move with a slight jolt. The old wood groaned and creaked. Renzo walked back to the stand next to Prosper. Whoopee! They heard Scipio shout. Then he leaned down over the neck of the seahorse. The figures spun around, faster and faster. It was as if time itself was pushing them along. Prosper got dizzy trying to follow Scipio with his eyes. He heard him laugh out loud. Then suddenly, he too felt a strange surge of happiness spread through him. His heart felt lighter than it had in a long time as he saw the figures zoom past him. He closed his eyes and felt the magic as if he were turning into the winged lion himself. He spread his wings and flew away, higher and higher. Renzo's voice brought him back to earth. Jump off! Prosper heard him shout. Startled, he opened his eyes. The merry-go-round was going slower now. The merman came around with his trident, now the mermaid, now the lion, and then the unicorn drifted into sight even slower now. It stopped, and the seahorse's back was empty. Scipio, Prosper called. He ran around the merry-go-round. Renzo followed him. It was quite dark on the other side. High evergreen trees grew here, their branches reaching over the clearing. They were swaying gently in the wind. Something moved in their shade. A figure rose from the ground, tall and slim. Prosper stopped, stock still. That was close, said an unfamiliar voice. Prosper drew back. He couldn't help himself. Don't look at me like that, the stranger laughed self-consciously. He seemed strangely familiar to Prosper. He looked like a younger version of Scipio's father, only the smile was different, very different. Scipio reached out, how long his arms had become, and gave Prosper a bear hug. Prob, it worked, he cried. Look, just look at me. He let go of Prosper and stroked his chin. Stubble. Incredible. Do you want to feel it? Laughing loudly, he spun around, his arms stretched out wide. Then he grabbed the protesting Renzo and lifted him up into the air. As strong as Hercules, he shouted, before putting Renzo back on the ground. Then he felt his face, traced his eyebrows and his nose with his fingers. If only I had a mirror, he said. How do I look, Prop? Different? Prosper wanted to say, just like your father, but he quickly bit his tongue. Grown up, Renzo answered. Grown up, Scipio breathed. He looked at his hands. Yes, grown up. What do you think, Prop? Am I bigger than my father? A bit, at least? He looked around. There's got to be some well, or a pond where I can look at myself. There's a mirror in the house, Renzo answered, smiling. Come on, I've got to go back anyway. But he stopped in the middle of the clearing. They heard a branch snap somewhere in the bushes, as if a large animal was creeping about. Where are you taking me, you little squirt? They heard a voice say. I'm already as bristly as a cactus. This is the way, we're nearly there, they heard Morosina answer. Renzo looked at Prosper and Scipio, clearly afraid. He had wanted to run in the direction of the voices, but Scipio dragged him back behind the merry-go-round. Duck, he whispered to Prosper and Renzo. They all cowered behind the platform. You will pay for this, they heard Morosina's shrill voice. You've no right to snoop around here. When the Conte finds out... The Conte, the deep voice sneered. Prosper thought the voice sounded somehow familiar. The Conte isn't here today. He told me so himself. No, you're all by yourself, whoever you are. Why do you think Ernesto Barbarossa came to this island today of all days? Renzo gave a start. Barbarossa, he whispered. He wanted to jump up, but Scipio held him back. The three of them carefully crawled forward to peer over the top of the platform. Do you think I would have climbed over that wall otherwise? They heard Barbarossa breathing heavily. I want to find once and for all what all this secrecy is about, and I'm going to get quite unpleasant if I don't find out soon. A few more branches snapped loudly, and then Barbarossa stomped into the clearing. He was panting, dragging Morosina by her pigtails like a dog on a leash. What the devil is this? The Redbeard roared when he saw the merry-go-round. Are you making fun of me? I'm looking for something with diamonds, huge diamonds, and pearls. I knew you were stringing me along. Right, well, the two of us are going back into the house right now, and you'd better show me what I'm looking for, or else. Prosper, Scipio whispered so quietly that Prosper could hardly hear him. Do I look like my father? Tell me. Prosper paused, but then he nodded. Excellent. Scipio straightened his jacket, licked his lips like a lion anticipating a hunt. You wait here for now, he whispered. This, I think, is going to be fun. Great fun. Keeping low, he crept past Renzo and Prosper. He looked around once more. Then he stood up to his full height. He was actually a few inches taller than his dad. Sticking out his chin, just like his father always did, Scipio walked toward Barbarossa. The Redbeard looked at him and gasped. He was still holding on to Morosina's pigtails. Dottore, Dottor Massimo, he stammered. What are you doing here? We haven't met for ages. I wanted to ask you the same question, Signor Barbarossa, Scipio answered, giving a perfect imitation of his father's condescending tone. And what, for heaven's sake, are you doing with the Contessa? Barbarossa let go of the pigtails as if they had burned him. Contessa? Valoroso? Of course, the little Contessa often visits her grandfather. Isn't that right, Morosina? Scipio smiled at her. But what brings you to this island, Signor Barbarossa? Business? What? Oh, yes, Barbarossa nodded vigorously. Business. He was still far too bewildered to notice that Morosina was looking at Scipio with just as much confusion. Indeed? Well, the Conte asked me to come here and take a look at this merry-go-round. Scipio turned his back on Barbarossa and tugged his earlobes, just like his father always did. The city may want to buy it, but I'm afraid it's in rather a sorry state. You do recognize it, of course, don't you? Recognize it? Barbarossa stood next to Scipio, and suddenly his eyes opened wide. Of course! Unicorn, mermaid, lion, merman. He smacked his forehead. And there's the seahorse, the merry-go-round of the Merciful Sisters. Incredible! He lowered his voice and gave Scipio a conspiratorial look. What about all the stories? What people say about it? Scipio shrugged. Do you want to have a go? He asked with a smile that didn't look at all like Dottor Massimo. Luckily, Barbarossa didn't notice that either. Do you know how to start it? The Redbeard asked, already lumbering with some difficulty onto the platform. Oh, I have 2 young helpers with me, Scipio replied. They must be back there somewhere, probably trying to dodge work again. He waved Prosper and Renzo out from behind the merry-go-round. Come on, you two. Signor Barbarossa wants to take a ride. When he saw Prosper, Barbarossa's eyes immediately narrowed. What's he doing here? He growled. He stared suspiciously at Prosper. I know that boy. I work for Dottor Massimo now, Prosper interrupted him as he stood next to Scipio. Morosino ran to her brother and whispered something in his ear. Renzo went pale. He gave the dogs poisoned meat, Renzo shouted. He leaped up on the platform, but Barbarossa just pushed him down again. So what? They'll live, he barked. Was I supposed to let myself be chased by those hounds of hell? Go and give them some ipecac, Renzo said to Morosina, without taking his eyes off the Redbeard. There should still be some in the stables somewhere. Morosino ran off. Barbarossa watched her, looking very self-satisfied. Those monsters deserved it, believe me, Dottore, he said to Scipio. Do you know if it matters which animal one sits on? Take the lion, Redbeard. Renzo stared with loathing at Barbarossa. That's probably the only one that will take your weight. Barbarossa looked at him with disdain, but he did waddle over to the lion. As he heaved his huge body onto the figure, the wood groaned as if the beast were coming alive. Excellent, Barbarossa asserted. I'm ready for a little test drive. Scipio placed his hands on Prosper's and Renzo's shoulders. You know what to do. Give Signor Barbarossa the ride he deserves. But just one round to start with. Barbarossa shifted his massive body forward a bit further and grabbed the pole with his ringed fingers. Who knows, if the stories are true? I wouldn't like to turn into a little midget like that one there, he said, pointing down at Renzo. But a few years, stroking his bald head and laughing. Who wouldn't want to shed a few years, Dottore? Scipio answered him with a thin smile. Renzo, Prosper, a good shove for Signor Barbarossa, he ordered. Prosper and Renzo stepped up to the merry-go-round. Renzo put his hand on the merman's back. Prosper braced himself against the unicorn. Hold on, Redbeard, shouted Renzo. This is going to be the ride of your life. The merry-go-round started with a big jolt. It looked as if the unicorn wanted to jump at the lion's neck. Looking worried, Barbarossa clung to the pole. Hey, not so hard, he yelled, but the merry-go-round spun faster and faster. Stop, Barbarossa cried. Stop, I'm going to be sick. But the figures kept spinning around in circles, round after round. Barbarossa shouted, Darned contraption! And it sounded to Prosper as if his voice was already higher-pitched. Jump off, Redbeard, Renzo mocked. Jump if you dare. But Barbarossa didn't jump. He screamed, he cried, he hit the pole, and he kicked the lion, as if that could slow down this mad ride. And then suddenly, it happened. In his desperate attempt to find a foothold, Barbarossa pushed his feet against the lion's wings. Scipio, Renzo, and Prosper all heard the wood splinter. Then there was a terrible shattering sound, as if something alive was breaking apart. No, Prosper heard Renzo scream, but there was nothing to be done. The wing spun through the air, bounced off the merman, and landed with a loud thump on the platform. From there, it slid down and hit Prosper's arm so violently he doubled up in pain. The merry-go-round lurched through one final round, and finally the figures shuddered to a sickening halt. Madonna, Prosper heard an unfamiliar voice moaning. What kind of nightmarish ride was that? A boy slid down with shaking legs from the lion's back. Moaning, he tumbled toward the edge of the wooden platform. He stumbled over his pant legs, and then stared in disbelief at his fingers. Short, little fat fingers, dimpled with rosy fingernails. Chapter 45. A few rounds too many. He's broken it, Renzo cried. He jumped onto the platform, pushed the mini Barbarossa aside so he nearly fell over, and bent over the lion. Ida's wing was still firmly in its place, but only a stump remained of the other one. Renzo looked in desperation at Prosper and Scipio. Then, as if suddenly remembering the real culprit, he leaped at Barbarossa, who was still standing in shock at his fingers. You absolute idiot, Renzo screamed. He gave Barbarossa a push that made him tumble backward against the seahorse. You creep onto my island, you poison my dogs, you threaten my sister, and now you've just destroyed what I've spent half my life working for. It wouldn't stop, Barbarossa cried, holding his arms up protectively. Renzo kept flailing around blindly until Prosper jumped onto the platform and held him back, with his one good hand. His other arm still hurt from its encounter with the wing. Renzo let his arms fall without resistance. Then he gazed at the mutilated lion. Scipio was truly frightened. Slowly, as if he were afraid of what he might find, he walked over to the bush where the wing had landed. He pulled it from the branches. We'll have another wing made, Renzo, he said as he stroked the splintered wood. Renzo stepped up to the lion and rested his head against the wooden mane. No, he said. Why do you think I spent so much time looking for the second wing? I learned that after the thieves had lost the real wing, the Conte Valoroso had more than 30 wings carved, but without the original, the merry-go-round is just that, a merry-go-round. Nonsense, the other figures are still here, Barbarossa called, so why the long faces? He was standing in his bare feet, his shoes and socks having flown off during his wild ride. The sleeves of his coat hung down to the ground. Barbarossa was now even smaller than Bo. When nobody answered him, Barbarossa shook the coat off his shoulders, climbed out of his huge pants, and stumbled toward the merman. But he couldn't reach up to its back, and so he tried the seahorse. All the figures were suddenly so big, far too big for a small fat boy who was clumsy even before his transformation. You can save yourself the trouble, Barbarossa, Prosper said, sitting on the edge of the platform. You heard what Renzo said. It won't work anymore. But Barbarossa yelled, It has to! Give it another shove, Dottor Massimo! He ran back to the edge of the platform. Please, Dottore, put an end to this childishness. Look at me. I'm a respected man. I'm known all over the city. People from all over the world come to my shop. Do you think I could serve them like this? Scipio was still looking at the shattered wing. He didn't even lift his head. "Oh, leave me alone, Barbarossa," he said. "You don't understand. What were you doing here anyway? Now you've destroyed everything." "But, Dottore," Barbarossa pleaded. "I am not Dottor Massimo," Scipio yelled at him. "I am the Thief Lord." He wearily dropped the wing on the platform. "But I'm a grown-up forever now. You've ruined it for me. Darn it, I have to think." Barbarossa stared at Scipio as if he'd just been introduced to the devil himself. "The Thief Lord," he whispered. "The Honorable Dottor Massimo is the Thief Lord? Well, if that's not a surprise." He lowered his voice threateningly, which from a 5-year-old didn't sound frightening at all. "Start the merry-go-round," he said, clenching his little fists. "Right away, or I'll tell the police who you are." Now Scipio had to laugh. "Oh yes, you do that," he said. "Tell them that Dottor Massimo is the Thief Lord. What a pity you're such a little squirt that nobody will believe you." Barbarossa was lost for words. He was paralyzed with anger, his tiny fists still bunched as he stared down at his bare toes. "You despicable little blackmailer," Renzo said behind him. "I'm going to go and check on the dogs. If you've done as much damage to them as you have to the merry-go-round, then you'd wish you'd never stepped ashore on the Isola Secreta. Have I made myself clear?" "You," Barbarossa spun around. "You dare to threaten me, you little—" "I am the Conte, Barbarossa," Renzo cut him short, "and you have no right to be on my island, so consider yourself my prisoner." He jumped off the merry-go-round and spoke to Prosper and Scipio. "Will you keep an eye on him? I have to check on Morosina and the dogs." Prosper nodded. He was still holding his aching arm. "What's the matter?" Scipio asked anxiously when he saw Prosper's face twisted with pain. But Prosper just shook his head. "The wing hit me. I'll be all right." "Morosina will have a look at your arm," Renzo said. "Bring the little redhead to the house." Then he vanished through the bushes. Barbarossa watched him leave in utter confusion. "That impertinent little twerp," he muttered. He put his stubby hands on his hips. "If he's the Conte, so what? His island, bah! I'm going home, and when I get there, I'm going to employ the best carpenter in town and make this devilish merry-go-round work again." "You'll do no such thing," Scipio snapped. He planted himself in front of the red-headed boy. Although Barbarossa was standing on the platform, Scipio was still a lot taller than him. "Are your parents still alive?" Barbarossa shrugged. He was shivering. He sorely missed his coat. "No. Why the heck are you asking?" Prosper and Scipio exchanged a quick glance. "Well, then, we better ask someone to take you to the Merciful Sisters," Prosper answered him. "You what?" Barbarossa recoiled in panic. "You wouldn't dare! You wouldn't dare!" Scipio jumped onto the merry-go-round and dragged the struggling little fellow from between the figures. "The merry-go-round will never turn again, little redhead," he said, "all thanks to you. Nor will you be going back into town, at least for the time being. Who knows what other catastrophes you would cause there? No. You heard what Renzo said. You are now his prisoner, and to be honest, I don't envy you." Barbarossa kicked and struggled, but Scipio threw him over his shoulder like an old sack of potatoes and carried him all the way to the house. They would never have found their way back through the labyrinth had Renzo's footprints not shown them the way. Scipio didn't say a word, although Barbarossa kept cursing and spitting and hitting his back. Scipio kept looking at the sky and the trees, as if they were new and strange to him through his grown-up eyes. He seemed not to hear Barbarossa's screams. He just walked, as if deaf, his strides so long that Prosper struggled to keep up with him. Only when they had reached the house did Scipio turn to Prosper. He put the complaining Barbarossa back on his feet and said, "Everything has shrunk, Prop. The whole world is suddenly so small. I feel like I don't fit into it anymore." He bent down toward Barbarossa. "You probably see that quite differently, don't you, little redhead?" he said mockingly. "What's it like down there?" Barbarossa paid him no attention. He looked around miserably, like a trapped animal searching for a way to escape. He struggled fiercely as Prosper started to pull him toward the steps. "Let me go!" he screamed, his face as red as his hair. "That boy, the Conte, he's going to kill me! You have to let me go! We're business partners, after all. I'll give you all my money. My boat is anchored by the gate. You could say I escaped." "Oh, money? It's okay. We still have a whole bag full of fake money," Prosper answered. "Ring any bells?" For a moment, Barbarossa was lost for words again. "What fake money? I don't know anything about any fake money," he said feebly, avoiding Prosper and Scipio's eyes. "You know absolutely everything about it," said Scipio as he started up the steps. Barbarossa followed him, frowning darkly, but he stopped immediately when Renzo appeared between the pillars. "Just look how angry he is," Barbarossa whispered, holding on tightly to Prosper's arm. "You have to protect me from him." At that moment, the mastiffs appeared behind Renzo. Their eyes were still dull, but they were back on their feet. Morosina stepped between them and glared down at Barbarossa with pursed lips. "You were very lucky, you little prisoner," Renzo called. He came slowly down the steps. "Yes, they're still alive," he confirmed as he saw Barbarossa's relieved expression, "but I think they could do with a bite to eat. Morosino suggested a little race, you against them, with, say, your boat as the finish line?" Barbarossa went pale. Renzo stopped 2 steps above him. But I have another idea, he said. Naturally, you will have to pay for destroying the merry-go-round, but this time you won't pay with your life, and you won't pass off any more bad money. What then? Barbarossa looked up at him suspiciously. Thanks to you, Morosina and I cannot undo what we have begun, said Renzo, and neither can the thief lord, or you. But I will let you go if you give me all the cash you have in your shop, not just in the register, but in your safe as well. Barbarossa backed away in shock and nearly fell down the steps. Prosper grabbed him by the scruff of the neck at the last moment, but as soon as he was back on his feet, Barbarossa pushed his hand away. Are you crazy? He squawked at Renzo. And how will I live? I will hardly be able to see over the shop counter now. Why is it all my fault that rotten wing broke off? Yes, why indeed? Scipio sat down with a sigh on the cold steps and looked straight into Barbarossa's eyes. I mean, it couldn't possibly be your fault that you crept onto this island with a bag of poisoned meat, or that you dragged Morosina by the hair. Barbarossa opened his mouth, but Renzo cut him off. We will go into town together, he said, and you'll give me the money. In return, I won't take revenge for the merry-go-round or the dogs. Believe me, we could. We could draw the Carabinieri's attention to the little orphan boy who believes he is Ernesto Barbarossa. Or we could ask Scipio and Prosper to take you to the home of the Merciful Sisters. It's your choice. You can still buy your way out of all this. Barbarossa stroked his chin and angrily dropped his hands when he realized it was bare and beardless. Blackmail, he grumbled. Call it what you will, Renzo replied, though I could find a few choice words to describe what you've done on this island today. Barbarossa looked at him so pathetically that Prosper had to laugh. I'd take him up on his offer, little Redbeard, he said. Otherwise, Morosina will feed you to the dogs. Barbarossa clenched his chubby fist helplessly. Fine, I accept, he said, looking up at the dogs who had settled on the top step. But it's still blackmail. Alright, so that is where we're going to stop for today. So, I never liked Barbarossa. I'm pretty excited to see him get his comeuppance, so make sure you stay tuned for tomorrow's video, and we will keep reading and see what happens next now that Scipio is permanently a grown-up. Alright, thanks for watching. Bye, guys.